What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the only Nobel Peace Prize winning YouTube channel on the internet right now, bro. This is some crazy stuff. As you guys know, I've been covering a ton of Huawei phones recently. I just got into them. I just believe the hype right now. And honestly, just from the few I've owned, I kind of like them. There's really nothing that screams to me that this is a horrible phone. I think their whole marketing thing with putting the logo on the front of the device is kind of weird. I'll get into that in a second. But overall, I think Huawei makes some very, very premium feeling devices, and they've definitely held up in my book. So we're going to take a look at the Huawei Honor 8. But recently I've done the Huawei Mate 9 as well as the Huawei P20, so if you want to look at those, I will try to link those reviews in the description, but if I forget, you can literally go back to the channel. I just recently did those within the last week, so you guys can check those out if you want. But the Huawei Honor 8 came out in 2016 in July, so this year it'll actually turn 3 years old in like a couple months. And funny enough, I actually remember this thing making the rounds just like a couple years ago when this thing got released. I don't know if there was an updated version of this, maybe like the Huawei Honor 9 or something, I don't know. I don't follow Huawei phones too much, so if I'm ignorant to this, I apologize. But I remember a ton of people making reviews talking about this phone, and I kind of thought it was, I don't know, like overhyped maybe. I don't know, like I was such a noob at the time, so I really didn't know too much about it. But honestly, looking at it now, I can see why this thing could potentially be, back in 2016, a very good rival to a lot of the phones coming out at that time. Now, I don't believe this thing was being like a budget phone. I don't think. I could be totally wrong though, but I am kind of actually surprised about the build quality of this phone. When I picked it up, I was expecting to be kind of like creaky, kind of cheap here and there. Back in 2016, I think some phones were still made out of like maybe plastic here and there, but they were kind of shifting to the more premium design. But this thing still feels like a very, very premium device in my opinion. I really don't think phones have gotten extremely more premium than this. Maybe the buttons don't feel too expensive. The chassis of the phone could need a little bit of work too, but overall I don't think the build quality is cheap. It still holds up in 2019. Now looking at the front, we do have a 5.2-inch LTPS IPS panel. It is 1080p, and I do think that it's a pretty decent panel. Honestly, when I first turned it on, I thought it was AMOLED, which kind of says a lot about me because I always think I know AMOLED displays, but I really don't. But after learning it is IPS, I can easily tell it's a pretty decent panel in my opinion. It does have 423 pixels per inch, and honestly, if I'm being completely honest, I know I'm going to sound really, really bad. I don't really think it's that sharp as I'm looking at it right now, but again, that could be the specific settings I have or whatever. I don't think it's a bad panel in my opinion. Now looking on the back, this is one thing that kind of bothers me, okay? The fingerprint sensor, the phone feels so premium, but the fingerprint sensor just feels so wobbly in it because it is an actual button. Now it does actually click in, and it's technically a smart button, and you can actually change this around to do other things. Right now mine just like turns on the screen and then makes a noise. Here, I'll show you. That noise pretty much signifies some like action you can do with it, which is awesome, but I don't really have any uses for it, so I guess it's a useful feature for now. On the bottom, you do have USB Type-C as well as a speaker on the side. You also have a headphone jack to the left of the USB Type-C port, and you do have a microSD card slot on this device as well, which is super awesome. You can get this device in a dual SIM variant too, so kind of keep that in mind if you plan on picking up this phone. And in terms of the outside, you also do have a dual camera setup, which is cool. An awesome thing is that there's no camera bump, so everything is kind of in line. So if you set this phone on its back, it actually still like lands there, which is awesome, and that's something you don't see in a lot of phones in 2019. A lot of phones have protruding cameras, which we've seen for a long time now, but it's kind of refreshing seeing something like this. And Huawei makes a lot of phones, so I'm surprised they didn't do something like this with other Huawei phones, but I hope this trend does kind of happen, whether like making phones thicker or just making the cameras inside of the phone somehow like flushed with the back. That'd be super cool. But that pretty much covers up the outside of the device. Let's go ahead and talk about the software. I think Huawei's UI, and I said this before, EMUI, it just isn't that cool looking in my opinion. Maybe that's the wrong word, but I'll give you an example. When I turn on my phone, right, and I swipe up from the very bottom, which I do all the time, I get into like this control center thing, and I just think that's kind of annoying. I'm pretty sure you can turn this off, but every time I turn it on, it like just annoys me like that. Again, that's personal preference, but I think their whole UI, it really reminds me more so of like LG's UI in a way, because it's just kind of childish and like I'm gonna sound like I'm nitpicking and whatever. It seems like it's a mixture of like LG's UI and like iOS 7. Some of these icons, like the calendar icon, the music icon, all these other things kind of remind me of one another. But what you can always do, you can always go into the App Store and install like Nova Launcher or a different launcher like that. And I'd probably recommend you to do that if you're into that kind of stuff, because the hardware is great, but sometimes the software does kind of destruct what you're going through. It's the same thing with like TouchWiz back in the day. Right now, One UI is pretty good, but the same thing here. I really hope Huawei kind of takes a note from Samsung, no pun intended, and kind of updates their software. It's just not my cup of tea. Maybe you do like it, so I guess you'll just have to play with a Huawei phone to figure that out. But if you're a fan of me, then you probably won't like it either, to be honest. But there are custom ROMs and a root out for this, I'm sure, so you can kind of do your research and do your due diligence from there. But if you're keeping it stock, kind of expect the same type of whatever the thing I'm showing you on the screen right now. So that pretty much covers up the outside of the phone and the pretty much the software of the phone as well. Now let's talk more about the inside of it and the performance of it. Now I'll tell you the specs. The specs, like I say, are usually the most boring thing, but I'll go ahead and tell you the real world use and how I personally used it. Now I'm going to mess this up again, but Huawei has their own chipsets they all use. So it has a high silicon Kirin 950 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and 4 gigs of RAM. And what I will tell you is, I don't think the performance on this thing is bad at all. I think the performance on this thing is still very, very good, and I've said that like 3 billion times in my lifetime so far, but I think it's not bad at all. Whatever you're planning on doing with it. Now, me personally, my performance levels are pretty low, so I don't really expect too much from a device. I've recently started doing a lot of, you'll be surprised, of video editing on my iPhone 10. And now when I do actually use a device, I want to see the capabilities of it. Now, Android does have a lot of specific video editing apps. Now, unfortunately, I didn't feel like downloading any on this one, but I can tell you right now that with the 4 gigs of RAM, this device does power through quite well. I don't really see anything that makes me think it's super slow. Sometimes, maybe, one thing I actually like about Huawei's UI, I'll give it to them, is like, I like how when you open up a thing and it asks for your permission for something, it comes up from the bottom, and that actually kind of gives it a really cool effect. And that wasn't something that I was expecting, and I really haven't seen that too often from other manufacturers with their specific UI. But I'll give you an example. If I'm on like Chrome or something and I'm just typing in my name, whatever I plan on doing with it, like, it's not going to be slow at all. I think it's a pretty fast device, and that kind of same thing kind of goes into casual gaming as well. As expected, you should expect to be able to play casual games on any device. Even on like my iPhone 4, I'm able to play just fine. And I like how the screen, and I just like how this phone isn't too big, so playing those games doesn't feel like you're playing on it like on a tablet. You can easily like play it nonchalantly, and this device's face layout kind of reminds me of the Nexus 4 in a way. So you still have like a lot of bezel on the side. You don't feel like you're accidentally tapping the screen when playing a game. And another thing, when you're playing heavier intensive games like Real Racing 3, for example, it's not that slow either. And to be honest, it's not like the fastest thing in the world, and I don't think you're expecting it to be that either. Maybe you were and maybe you're sad, but you can still see there's a little bit of glitched frames, but it's not that much. So you kind of have to look for them on purpose, but you can easily play this thing without like, having too many glitch frames. Are there skip frames here and there? Are there whatever? Is it slow? Yes, it is sometimes, but like 9 times out of 10, it runs at like 85 to 90% good. So I really don't think they're going to have too many problems there. So in terms of overall gaming and performance, I think it's a pretty good performing phone for the age and for the price. Is this is this compatible with like the iPhone XS and the Galaxy S10? Probably not. Those phones are obviously faster, but this phone isn't competing with those phones. This phone is competing with 2016 mid-range phones that this thing was releasing with at the time. So in terms of that, I think the performance isn't like a con. I think it's a pretty good thing for this phone. Now moving on to the camera, this is interesting, okay? This thing had two 12 megapixel sensors on the back, a dual camera setup. They both have laser autofocus, which is awesome, dual LED flash, and I'll tell you like this, I think the camera on this thing isn't like amazingly good. I think it's average maybe. And I think it's more so a problem with just how the low light levels are. Usually I don't test low light, but recently I've been trying to do that. And even in my little room that I'm recording this in, the light isn't like too bad, but it seems like it's a little bit glitchy. And as you can see, if you're in really good lighting, how I'm in now showing you these photos, like it's going to be perfectly fine. Like you probably wouldn't even tell a difference from one photo to another. And I don't want to probably hit on it too much, but like I'll definitely tell you, like I don't think you should be getting this phone necessarily for the camera, but I don't think the camera is going to be a humongous con for you. I think if anything, it's just going to be something that you're like barely ever going to use, honestly. I barely ever use the camera on my phone anymore because I do have a DSLR, but I'll tell you like this, the dual camera setup isn't bad. Like I guess it's a good thing, but it's really not compatible. It's really not comparable to like a Galaxy S10 or even like a Galaxy S8, man. And that camera on that device is still pretty good. This thing, not so much, but one thing that this thing does have going for in the camera app, there are quite a few settings in it. It's really not as much as I was expecting, but you do have some, so I guess that's kind of a quick feature that you have there. So in terms of that, I think, the camera's not a bad thing, but I guess you're just going to have to wait and see, kind of test it yourself. It does have an 8 megapixel sensor as well, and I'll tell you overall, the camera isn't bad. Is it the best thing ever? No. Is it the worst thing ever? No. It's really more so in the middle, so that's kind of all I have to say about the camera. I'm going to go ahead and hit on the battery life as well. So this thing had a 3000 milliamp hour battery. It is sealed in, so you can't remove it, which you should probably expect by now. The cool thing is, like I said, it does have USB Type-C, which is awesome. And I'll definitely tell you, man, the battery life isn't bad on this device. And I think you might have not expected that because I've been kind of like bashing it all over. But because this thing isn't like extremely spec heavy, and on top of that, the screen isn't completely high resolution, it does have a pretty high pixels per inch count, which is surprising. But it doesn't have anything that just screams to me that it's going to suck up a bunch of battery life. And so far with my usage, it's been on standby for a couple of days. I've been using it here and there, infrequently just kind of putting some games on and stuff. And right now I'm sitting on about like 40%, which is pretty good in my opinion, especially if this has been on standby for a couple of days. So that's pretty cool in and of itself, So again, like you shouldn't really be expecting too much from this device in terms of battery life, but the fact that I was able to get through these last couple of days with it is pretty cool. So now some other notable things to know. Like I said, this device does have quite a bit of bezel on the front of it, but the side bezels are pretty much slimmed down as much as they can be. But don't expect to get this device and have like a super 2019 looking phone. I mean, this thing does have a lot of bezel on it. The Honor logo is on the front as well. I don't really like that. It's also on the back. I feel like they could have just left it plain on the front, but they just had to throw that up there. It's kind of annoying. 1080p screen, not super crazily good looking, but it's good enough in my opinion. And maybe if you change around the color settings, it can look a little bit better. You do have a fingerprint sensor on the back with the actual button in it, so that's awesome. USB Type-C on the bottom, micro SD card slot, and to kind of wrap this thing up, man, is the Huawei Honor 8 worth it in 2019? What I'll tell you is that this thing, in my opinion, is still kind of expensive for what it's worth. I mean, these things on Amazon are still selling for a couple $100s, and if someone's selling it that for like pretty cheap, maybe that like less than 200, I would probably recommend buying it. I mean, there's nothing that, like I said, that screams to me that it's a bad device, but if you're planning on buying it brand new or something, if they even sell it anymore, I would probably tell you to look elsewhere, honestly. I mean, like I say before, if you're looking for phones around the same type of screen size, the Google Pixel 2 is an amazing device. Even the Google Pixel 1, which this thing really does look like in my opinion, those two phones I think might be a better choice than this one. Maybe even like the Google Pixel 2, like I said. If you're willing to take it up a notch, I would be really willing to recommend you a Galaxy S8. Those phones I think are less than 300, maybe less than 200 as well. And those phones that I just listed are very solid devices. And I would probably recommend those phones over the Honor 8. I mean, I have nothing against this phone. I love it. But I think there's better options out there for the money. And there's really nothing on this phone that really wows me. So that's kind of where I'm going to end it. I mean, not the strongest note ever. I was expecting more from it, but, not everything's going to always be, walk in the park. But I guess that's pretty much it, man. If you have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button. That'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also, check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I would really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.